All right. Well, thank you very much. So I love Don Stevens' opener yesterday about storytelling. And since every good story has an origin, I thought I'd share mine. So a little more than 15 years ago, I lucked into my position at Typefi after attending an early demo of Typefi at an InDesign user group meeting in the DC area. I've been working with publishing teams at the American Federation of Teachers, Congressional Quarterly, and the National Rifle Association, helping them move from Quark Express publishing server over to InDesign and InCopy. And when I walked down to the stage to chat with our Adobe rep afterwards, she turned to the Typefi guys and made introductions, and then the rest is history, essentially. So over the last 15 years, I've been focusing on InDesign automation and really looking at how we can use InDesign outside of sort of traditional strongholds, magazines, newspapers, books. And that's, I think, how I kind of ended up here today at DITAWORLD. So I appreciate the invitation to speak, and I'm looking forward to showing you a little bit what InDesign can do with technical communications. So brief sort of overview of the agenda. So I want to talk a little bit about some trends that are interesting to me in TechComm and MarComm, how that sort of flows into this idea of unified experiences. Give you a little bit of background about what Typefi is and what InDesign is, and then give you a demonstration. So looking through the Adobe Technical Communication survey from 2020, it's a really interesting document. And if you haven't looked at it, I strongly urge that you take a look. I know Stefan's posted several times in the chat links to that survey, and it's got a wealth of information and interesting tidbits about this. But so the survey itself, it covers like 60 different countries, many different industries: telecom, financial services, healthcare, engineering, education. There are like almost 1,700 different responses, and slightly more than half of the respondents came from sort of small businesses under the 500 employee side of things. So the first sort of note that interests me was around structured content adoption. And if we look at this trend where there's a pretty good penetration with very large companies, the 5,000 members and up, 44%, about equal with the style-based or unstructured content. But it really starts to go down as you get to smaller organizations. Now, I think this is kind of interesting because, at least in our experience at Typefi, many of the production teams that are taking the structured content and doing things with it are actually really small. And I'll get into that a little bit later. So outside of the Adobe TechComm survey, the 2020 DITA satisfaction report by the Content Wrangler has this interesting observation that once that has been implemented, that more than half organizations report that there's interest from other departments. And then if we drill down into that, training and e-learning, it makes sense. DITA is a very easy fit for that. And looking at sales and marketing, almost a quarter of those groups are also interested in what DITA can offer. And that's really starts to sort of lead into this idea of the cross-channel synergies and thinking about TechComm versus MarComm. And so if we look at this information from the TechComm survey, the top three synergies that were identified: sharing common assets, the content reuse across both, and brand or UX consistency, very strong. Now, I think this is interesting, especially when you start thinking about sort of a side note on synergies. So if you think about 2017, there were over 3 billion views and over 60 million searches for unboxing. And every artifact from the box to its packaging, to the product and its instructions, to the knowledge base articles, everything. These are all points of interest along the customer journey, and they influence the customer experience. And I'm like totally biased, but in my opinion, tech comms are marketing. Yes, there is a rigor and a precision in the language of tech comms that isn't typically found in Marcoms. But readability and usability are not simply about perfecting the language, the content, the form of the content, the packaging that affects its consumption. So to paraphrase Val from the other day, if you put expensive content into a crappy layout, then that would become crappy, expensive content. Look at content delivery channels and the trends here. I wanted to look at sort of comparing the 2017-2018 version of the TechCom survey to the 2020 survey and see sort of where things are varying across time. And so we see there's a pretty significant drop in the Microsoft compiled help. And there's some nice growth in the responsive HTML5. And everybody still loves PDF. And wow, this realization there are 2.5 trillion PDFs at large in the world from Elliott's keynote on Tuesday. I think the sort of the portability and reliability of PDF, that it works and looks the same across platforms, across devices, on screen or in print, those are its major strengths. And with the new Sensei-powered liquid mode to enable this optimized viewing of PDFs on small screens, that's even more flexible. And we're really incredibly excited about liquid mode. But I think there's a caveat for us in looking at liquid mode is that right now it's only beneficial to sighted users. Liquid mode actually completely ignores any of the native tagging within an accessible PDF. But as a 1.0 product, liquid mode is very impressive. And I think it bodes very well for this continued high numbers of PDF as a content delivery channel. So switching gears slightly over from TechCom into Marcom. And I think the idea here in that in many ways, TechCom kind of fills the post, it's some pre-sales research, but it's more post-sales sort of support type content. And Marcom is really focused on that pre-sales. And if we look at content marketing strategies, so the HubSpot has their Not Another State of Marketing report, and in their sort of analysis and view and survey, videos are the #1 content strategy for getting information out to consumers, followed by blog posts and ebooks. Interesting enough, but again, HubSpot's report is focused on this traditional concept of Marcom and does not include the looking at post-purchase or tech comms as part of content marketing. So there's a caveat on these numbers. Another annual report that's interesting to look at is from the Content Marketing Institute. And so they're looking at the types of material that B2B marketers have used over the last 12 months. And so this is looking from September of 2019 through September of 2020. And again, it's pretty interesting that ebooks, it's like 54% as a content, case studies, white papers, long form text, research reports, print digital magazines, 26%, print books, pretty small, it's around 5% or so. But again, this is getting into starting to think about the relative strengths of what InDesign is as an output channel. And when we think about omnichannel marketing, like I've been going to the Adobe Summit for a couple of years now, and one of the things that you never see at the Adobe Summit is InDesign. There's no mention of print really at all. It's really focused on this idea of omnichannel being different screens, different forms or types of screens, small screens, big screens, electronic billboards, down to point of sale systems and so forth. And I think this very old quote or thought from a corporate executive board report that was mentioned in this Harvard Business Review article from 2012, that nearly 60% of a typical purchasing decision is completed before even having a conversation with the supplier. Okay, so it's 2020. The point here is that if customers were informed and empowered in 2012, they are even more informed and more empowered today. And they don't care about content silos. They don't care whether it's from TechComm or Marcom. They don't care about org charts. But what matters to the customer is that unified experience. And with this increasing proliferation of channels, content management and reuse across channels, not just digital channels, but digital and analog, print, these artifacts that we can create, it's even more critical today. And so that gets into this idea of this unified experience. And so again, when we're looking at where we are today at DITAWORLD and Adobe as our very gracious host for this conference, the AEM, W Experience Manager, it is the next generation digital asset management tool. It is such a full-featured way of looking at content and understanding how your content can be reused and tracking it and analyzing it and moving it around. And when we get into the XML documentation, this is that structured content management, again, for this idea of experience-driven documentation, that we want to make sure that the content is reactive to the customers where they are. It is not just stale, static, but it is this living, breathing thing. And so Typefi, we look at the tagline for InDesign. It's about automated processes, professional design. This is where design is the preeminent focus of InDesign. And so while traditionally in TechComm, whether it's in practice or even in training, InDesign is overlooked. But InDesign as an application, InDesign Server as well, these are the overwhelming market leaders for creative professionals. Now, if we look back at Adobe's numbers from 2019, when they talked about their the market potential for the creative market, they're looking at how things are going with the Creative Cloud and what their potential audience is. They were estimating a bare minimum of 45 million potential users worldwide. So they're saying there are like 35 million people that are engaged in a creative profession, and 10 million students that are in creative professional programs. But then when you start adding in like hobbyists and prosumers and so forth, this 45 million goes up to 745 million. Huge numbers and every single Creative Cloud subscriber has access to InDesign. So it's an amazing tool, but there's a problem. When we look at AEM as a source and XML documentation for Experience Manager, there's no direct channel to integrate with this tool that I love, that I've been using for years now. And the focus so far has been that AEM will ingest or pull contents out of InDesign files, or if I'm working interactively within an InDesign document, I can place assets from AEM and thinking about it as a digital asset management tool. So I can pull graphics in to InDesign. But as far as repurposing content from AEM back to InDesign, there's not really that channel. There's not a native option. And so when we start thinking about the strengths of each of these tools, DITA Open Toolkit, amazing cross-platform, blazingly fast. It's far faster than InDesign Server. You can containerize Open Toolkit. So if you're looking for high bandwidth distributed content rendering, DITA OT is way out there. The extensibility of DITA OT, I think you can look back at all the previous sessions over these last 2 days or 3 days, and you can see that there is so much opportunity for how you can build and extend and modify DITA OT. It's got a very, it's the software license cost. If you're using FOP, it's free. As soon as you start talking about Antenna House or RenderX, there's costs associated with that. And being a transform-based output, it's reliable. You're going to get exactly what you want because you've written the code. Now, flipping over to InDesign Server, I mean, InDesign Server, the typesetting controls that you have within InDesign are bar none. And I think this is really why when Adobe launched InDesign, they were facing a market leader at Quark, like 95% penetration. And within a few years, Quark is an afterthought. So InDesign's typography is just bar none. The native export from PDF for InDesign is also stellar. Full support for blending modes and transparency. We don't get that with the kinds of transforms that you get out of DITA OT. Color management, again, InDesign's got a much stronger there. And then just having that visual prototyping, the WYSIWYG view within InDesign is kind of like what we have with FrameMaker. But getting back or looking at my origin story, I think one of the biggest strengths of InDesign and InDesign Server is this community. That there's a huge pool of creative professionals and a very vibrant scripting community, and there's a similar architecture. So you want to script or extend FrameMaker, you're going to use extend script as well, and InDesign, it's the same scripting sort of JavaScript based, ECMAScript based architecture. But the cool thing I think with this community is like there is a third-party hosted Adobe Slack. There's the user-to-user forums, and the members in these forums and on that Slack are so crazy helpful. You post a question and someone whip up a script for you like overnight. It is quite amazing. Now, contrasting InDesign to FrameMaker. I mean, FrameMaker, the numbering options, the footnotes, indexing, all of that, it sort of blows InDesign away. InDesign is really designed initially around magazines and newspapers that don't have those needs. And so you have to add that sort of stuff to InDesign through either very clever scripting or third-party plugins. The other thing that the FrameMaker has is the authoring experience around DITA. InDesign, there's nothing like this. InDesign has an XML layer, but even we don't use it. So I wouldn't suggest anybody attempt to use InDesign's XML. The translation support, the native HTML5 output, all of those are massive strengths for FrameMaker Publishing Server. But how can we, Typefi, what do we bring? How do we integrate InDesign into Adobe Experience Manager? Our sort of tag is we want to extend your reach. And again, this is really focused around how can we start to bring this omni-channel and redefine omni-channel, not simply to mean digital, but digital plus analog. So what is Typefi? Again, Typefi, we're an automated publishing system. We're built on top of Adobe InDesign Server. And we allow you to pull that XML from XML documentation for Experience Manager through the workflow and actually compose DITA directly into InDesign. And so it is an end-to-end tool to be able to produce fully editable InDesign documents, fully rendered PDFs, and return that right back into AEM so you can manage it. So it's a complete delivery solution for that superior print output. And we really stress and focus on the ability for us to produce these fully accessible PDFs out of the box. There's very little that you actually have to do as a user in order to produce that accessible PDF. It just naturally comes out from our automation. So I just want to sort of quickly glance over some of the customers that we worked with over the last 15 years at Typefi, and some of the outputs, the visual type outputs that we've done. And you can see that every one of these customers is all using XML, whether it's Lonely Planet, Travel, XML, or the ISO, or Pioneer. Each of these customers is using XML, driving through to InDesign to produce their content. So, talking about Pioneer for a second, we've got this amazing record box for DJs, and prior to working with Typefi, Pioneer Media Crates was using 3B2 to automate the production of their instruction and technical manuals. And while 3B2 allowed the creation of really high quality, complex layout PDFs, what the PMC team found was that the workflows were onerous, that even minor changes to their templates were very costly from a time and just the upfront expense. And so they migrated from 3B2 into an InDesign workflow, again with XML driving this content. The International Monetary Fund. So their flagship publication is the World Economic Outlook. And prior to implementing this automation, they would spend 6 weeks in production to lay out that book. And I mean, believe me, 6 weeks is an eternity for economic data. And so being able to reduce that by 80% from 6 weeks to 6 days is a game changer to get the most up-to-date current information into this thing so that our leaders all over the world can make decisions. And they're not sacrificing any design or readability or accessibility in that automation. So it's a very small production team, just a handful of people that's producing all of the titles at the IMF. Now, I threw this one in, even though this is a really old quote as well. So this is 2010. So Insight Guides, it's a UK travel publisher, and the idea for them is like they're a small outfit. They're not a Lonely Planet. They're not a Fodor's. They're not a Rick Steves. They're more sort of boutique in a way, I guess. And when they started, they had 5 designers and laying out all of their print books. And they looked at EPUB and said, we can't do it. Like we can't, we don't have time in our schedule to be able to produce both print and digital. I mean, these were crafted layouts. And so we worked with them. And so in that first year, in that 2010, they were able to produce the first 6 months, 17 ebooks. And then by the end of the year, 62. They'd ramped up quite considerably. And then sort of, rather than sort of focusing on that, I think the other thing to think about is that, the team itself, Insight was actually able to improve their product, get their content into more people, and they even were they right-sized their team. They actually dropped down to 2 designers to maintain all of their content. And they weren't stressed, they weren't overworked. They were able to produce all of this with less effort because of that automation. All right, so I want to jump out of the presentation and let's get into an actual demo. Let's see if this will work for me. All right. Touch ID. So we're working in assets in Experience Manager. And the first thing I want to do is I want to look at something that is more tech docky. And so I've got a large collection of content, and I don't really want to spend a lot of time diving into the XML documentation side of the workflow because, I mean, Adobe has done a bang-up job of showing you the capabilities, showing you the review features within XML documentation and how the authoring process gives you both the WYSIWYG and a source mode. And so what I want to focus on is just how we get this content, all this DITA content from AEM and push it over into InDesign to get back a fully formed InDesign document that is rendered from that DITA. And so, as I mentioned earlier, and that XML documentation does not support the extensibility to be able to insert InDesign Server as a new option for the output presets. And so what we've done as a workaround is we have an overlay. And so I can select my DITA map and go into the Typefi mode. And so when I go into here, I can choose that I want to browse through Typefi and select a workflow. And so we're going to attach a workflow externally to this DITA file. So I'm going to browse through here and I can grab a workflow. Now I may have many different workflows for different purposes, and I'll show a little bit more of that in a moment. But I attach that workflow. And let's go ahead and get out of here and switch over. So when I click run on this side, our plugin for AM, XML Documentation, is going to resolve the refs in that DITA map. It's going to bundle everything up into a simple zip file and send that over to Typefi, which is in the window to the side. So I'll click run. And here we go. So it's processing over here. So this is the view to give you an idea that, okay, something has started. I can monitor that status as we look, and I can switch over to the Typefi side. And again, I can see that that job is running over here. So I'm going to actually dive into that job and sort of see what's happening behind the scenes. And so we can see the start time when the job was passed over to the server. Now this server that I'm running on right now, this is all running and hosted within AWS. And one of the things that I think is interesting in talking about InDesign server is that, similar to FrameMaker Publishing Server, you can spawn multiple instances, so you can scale horizontally, and you can set things up. But one of the things that FrameMaker Publishing Server comes with is, FrameMaker Publishing Server is a load balancer, where InDesign server actually does not include any sort of load balancing. And so we actually give you a free load balancer called Blinken Lights to manage those queues and slice and dice and see how things work. So we can see the job completed. It took 41 seconds to render out this content through InDesign. And I can see back over here on the AM side that I have my output. And I can go into the output and I can see I've got an InDesign file or a PDF. So if I download that PDF, and we'll give it a second to open up. So here is my final PDF from this medical information system. And so this is something that people in America will have familiarity with. This is sort of detailing what is covered and what is not covered by your healthcare. Anyone else outside of America has probably never seen anything quite like this before. But this is our reality, as much as it may be. So we can look through this. It's very plain. It's just 2 columns of text. We'll have these sidebar boxes every now and then to highlight certain pieces of information. We have our T tables to give you some information about things in a little grid like that. And then the obligatory at the end, here's an example. If you have this coverage and you do this procedure, this is what you're going to pay out of pocket. Again, if you're not American, you've never seen anything quite like this before. And I'm sorry. Anyway, but what I want to jump into is actually, I want to look at the InDesign file, because there's a couple things in here that really talk about how, as a designer, you can push that design so much further in a fully automated fashion. So I'm going to go over to the Typefi side and just grab the InDesign document from here. And just give this a second. You copy over into my folder. All right. So when we look at this InDesign document, there are a couple things that I want to call out particular, in that in the source DITA file, there's actually no special handling for phone numbers. And there's no special handling around web addresses and so forth. But one of the things that we've learned in thinking about how we consume content is that the density of content matters. And so when we're laying out this content, we want to make sure that when we're looking at a phone number or a URL, that it breaks in a way that makes sense. And so, like, for example, on this page right here, there's plenty of room for the call 1555 number to start on that previous line. But by using something very simple within the layout that anyone that understands grep, or that you work with into the community on the forums, they can help you or assist you in defining these grep rules. And so we allow you to, within InDesign, to create grep styles or grep searches. And so we have a really scary looking, but it's actually quite simple, grep that is looking for URLs. We have another grep that is looking for phone numbers and forces them not to break and says, I want to make sure that those numbers stay together as a unit.
Would you mind zooming up your screen just a second? Or just a little bit? Thanks. Just make it easier for those on small resolution monitors.
Yep.
Perfect.
So this second column here, if you've worked with grep before, it's a pattern. So we're looking to see, do we have a number that's preceded by and we're looking at U.S. phone numbers. This is the structure of a U.S. phone number, that we have a repeat of 1 or 2 of these. Whether you're using whatever style you might be using around the area code. Is it parentheses? Is it a dash? Is it a period? So all that sort of supported or enabled within this grep search. But this is one of these things that we can apply as a post-process sort of tweak within the layout. So we don't have to do this within a transform on the XML because maybe we don't want to inject characters within our content or no break flags that might affect other outputs. And so because we're going to print, because we're going to PDF, we want an interactive PDF, we're going to make these changes and tweaks just on that particular output channel. So that's just a quick little thing that we can do within here to extend and augment some of the native features within InDesign. All right. So I want to sort of drop back out of InDesign for a second, go back over to AM, and let's look at something that's more marketing centric. So this is a designed brochure, and go into this content, and we've got beautiful imagery, but we also have some step-by-step instructions. All this is set up as simple DITA files, structured and organized in a DITA map. So again, the process from a Typefi integration perspective is I literally just select my DITA map, click over into the Typefi side of things. I can browse for my workflow. And here I have 2 different workflows that I'm working with. And the reason why I have 2 here is really about looking at, well, I have one workflow, the demo AM workflow, for dealing with Western European or Chinese, actually, content. And so all of those are going to be in a left to right composition. But my demo AR is designed for when I want to publish this in Arabic or a right to left composition. And so InDesign has incredible support for world language composition. I think InDesign supports more languages now with some of the Southeast Asian stuff than even Frame does. And so there's a little distinction there. Like if you're publishing content in some script languages like Sri Lankan or so forth, that you can now do that with the 2020 edition of InDesign. So I'm going to attach this workflow, and I'm going to run that over through to Typefi. And again, I can see the jobs running on the AM side. I can see it's running over here. Now this will complete a lot faster, but while this is running, I want to actually look at, well, what is a workflow on Typefi side of things? And so the first thing to think about, like if we look at Scriptorium's conversation yesterday, where we were looking at this idea of I want to go from DITA and I want to apply transform and maybe convert that into ICML, which is the in-copy markup language, which is a story-based XML for InDesign. So what we're actually doing here is we're taking the DITA file and we're applying a transform as part of an ANT script. And so Typefi supports a whole series of different actions that you can use within these workflows. So I have InDesign specific actions. So I can compose an InDesign book or a document. I can export from that to EPUB, to interactive PDF, and I can package it and get that ready for publishing. We have Ant, we have Daisy, which is a precursor to EPUB 3 that's geared around Braille devices and accessibility. We integrate with Extensis, so you have native font support. So if you've got a huge font library, we can pull everything in automatically out of that. I mentioned earlier ISO STS. We support JATS. All these different kinds of XML, we can integrate those into these workflows. But this is a very simple workflow. So we're going to ingest the AEM package. So take that zip, explode it, convert it from DITA into content XML. We're going to gather the fonts and collect the fonts that InDesign needs so that we can load those dynamically. We're going to compose the InDesign document or render, create a rendition of that. And then finally, we'll export that out to PDF. And I can choose any kind of PDF preset that might already be set up on the server. It's just pulling it down from a list. Now, when we're working within the actual InDesign side of things, we have our own scripting overlay that allows you to start to interrupt the InDesign's process and say, well, I want to run a script. And so if we think about some of the stuff we were talking about in the previous session in extending FrameMaker. So this allows you to extend InDesign while it's actually composing the content. And so we're not actually waiting till the end and composing things and potentially having a snowball effect where content might reflow or change because we have recomposed something early in the document that changes the positions of stuff later on. This allows us to do sort of a just-in-time execution of scripts during that composition. It's extremely powerful, and it's baked right into this workflow. So let's check back in on that content. And we have the output. It took 24 seconds to produce this, and these numbers are actually a little slow. There may be some other activity running on this InDesign server in the background. So take a look at this PDF, and I'm gonna zoom out. So we get a nice, beautiful PDF, simple content, different arrangements where we have a narrow column. Now we're getting a wider column. We get a full width column underneath with our product details, back to that narrow column with product stuff, and then our step-by-step instructions, followed by our back page. And again, every single thing in here is just straight up DITA. And to prove that, I can go into any of these different layouts. So we'll look at, let's look at the product spec. So we can look at all this content. It's very simple. We just have an image ref in there, and there's nothing even in here as far as style tags. So it's as plain vanilla of DITA content as you can think. Now, there's actually a problem here, though. If I look back at this cover page, this text on the top is really hard to read because it's sitting right on top of that area in the background. And this is really what I love about the automation that you have, or the possibilities of automation you have with InDesign, because we get this fully rendered InDesign document. And so I can download this InDesign file, and I can make a on-site, in-place sort of edit, modification to this particular layout. So we'll open this up. Now InDesign has to render all of the links on the fly because the default behavior is for speed, it's not going to create these proxy previews, low-res screen previews. And so on import or open, it's going to re-import every single one of these graphics to give me this nice high-res view. So I've got this content, but thankfully the designer anticipated that things like this could happen. And so we have an object style defined within this document that I can apply to this content, and it just applies a simple feather to the background. And so that over or underlaid lamp that was obscuring or making difficult for me to read that content is blown away. And now I can take this InDesign file and I can export it out from my local desktop to a new PDF and drag and drop that back into AEM. So you get the sort of the best of both worlds. You have the potential for full-on automation from AEM or other XML sources through into InDesign, with the ability to use scripting to tweak and manipulate and override those layouts, like I showed with the grep stuff on that health brochure, or to be able to partially automate something, get your content that's mostly done, and then do the final handwork within InDesign. Now, let's take a look at running that exact same content through the other workflow. So we'll go back out here, and I'll jump up to, I'll do the Arabic one actually. So again, I'm going to attach a workflow, and this is just looking at the workflows that are available on the Typefi server. Attach that, and that's going to define what those business rules are. And I can run that. And while this is running, I can get on and do other things. I can come back in here anytime I want and check it out. And I can monitor that status over here within the Typefi side of things. And there are responses from InDesign server echoing through. Job complete. Now this one, the AR version actually creates a package. And so there's an extra step in that workflow to create and bundle everything together, so I can take this and zip it and send it on to a print provider and have them publish it. So we take a look at the Arabic version. And here I've already incorporated in that change of the feather detail, so my content is not obscured. And I get, you notice that the content actually flips. And so instead of being on that right quarter, it's in the bottom left quarter of the page. Right to left bullets. And even my step-by-step instructions are now flipped to be the opposite direction that they were before. All right. Let's see. So just to sort of summarize what we've done, so the idea here is to show how easy it is to actually integrate and manage data content from within XML documentation for Adobe Experience Manager, and then publish that content from AM with the XML documentation into InDesign server and get back a full editable high-res InDesign document and a PDF. And then looking at the way the templates are sort of built of these kit of parts, there was a lot of discussion earlier about the templates and how in Frame you've got to work with paragraph styles and character styles and there's master pages and when you're implementing Typefi, absolutely that it's critical that you build that and that you define that and you think ahead of time. About what are the different components. If we look at some of the projects where we worked, especially on the travel books, these templates might have well over 100 different master pages, looking at different ways that they might want to present or arrange their content, and then the furniture on the page, the elements, it corresponds to elements we might have within our DITA content, like those gray boxes, the sidebar boxes we had in the healthcare thing. That's a particular content wrapper in DITA, and we're mapping that to a particular visualization of that content on the InDesign side of things. So I know I talked really fast, and I sort of left some time at the end, about 15 minutes or so, to dive into questions, because I know that InDesign is not something that many of you have direct experience with, and how this might work. And I'm happy to jump into sort of what the underbelly, how Typefi actually performs this magic behind the scenes and makes it so seamless. And so I'm going to sort of drop out of that And I'd like to talk about any questions that might come up. Now, let me see if I can figure out how to.
Caleb, we do have a couple, and I know, so the queue, their transmission is behind just a couple seconds, so the questions will start coming in a second. But one in particular, you were showing the object style. And by the way,
yes.
I go all the way back to K2 with InDesign, so I'm the original beta there. So I am enamored of the product and work mostly in FrameMaker, but love to use both for different things. The question was whether or how you might automate the application of the style. I believe it was the style where you blurred out the lamp behind the text frame. How you might automate application of that style through whether it's your product or whether it's just how do you get the object style to apply automatically, somewhat automatically based upon maybe the metadata within your content?
Right. So, I mean, we've done things, and this is one of the things that is really interesting around, we start really diving into the potential. So, and I'm going to answer this in a sort of a sideways fashion.
Sure.
So, accessibility is one of the things that we really stress. Like, we are very adamant about, wanting to make sure that we get accessible content out. We want everyone to be able to consume our content. And so we've had these discussions around, well, how do we get the alt text for images? And so you talked about the metadata. And so in many ways around this, what we would be looking at for how to automatically sort of match up and know that, hey, for this particular layout, let me actually go to page 1, that we need to have that object style applied to it because of that for this particular application where we're using that graphic, because we don't want to modify the graphic in source. We want to use a variation addition. And so we would look for some sort of XML or XMP metadata that's embedded within the graphic to say, hey, when you place this, I need you to do something else. And so whether you're using XMP to pass along the alt text for that accessibility, or whether you're using XMP to pass through, here is a preferred crop or behavior that I want you to apply post-processing for this particular template. That's what we would look for. And XMP is fully addressable through that extend script layer within InDesign.
And then for those that don't know, XMP is that metadata structure that Adobe kind of adopts and puts forward. So that metadata structure, just because I know we're going to have a lot of people in the audience that don't know what XMP is.
Yep.
In particular.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's the extensible metadata platform.
Yes, yeah. It's fun to be able to work with this and have images and have content that can actually start to inform and instruct your automation. Hey, when I come in, do something different with me. I
see Sensei coming in real quick. I believe you were at Max.
Yes.
Were you at Max? Yeah. Could you go 5 minutes without hearing another story about Sensei with Adobe products? Man.
Absolutely not. Yeah, no. Yeah. I mean, I think one of the things that we're still looking for, like right now, there's a content aware crop feature that has been added to InDesign, and so it can identify the subject of your content and try to do a very intelligent cropping around that.
Yeah.
The downside right now is that we're still in a disconnected world. And so what the InDesign team did was they took the Sensei education and they embedded it within InDesign. So it doesn't actually learn anything more yet. It's still self-contained, localized. But I think in a future version of InDesign, I am very much looking forward to the Sensei that has learned and has grown and can do new things without actually modifying their local app.
And it's not just isolating something from a common background. Like the shot of you, I guess my background, I think you're looking at my shot right now, but I'm on a very flat background. It'd be pretty easy to isolate me from this background. Looking at your background, you've got everything behind you, and Sensei would still be able to identify you, the colors,
absolutely,
include the text on your shirt, include everything about it but exclude everything that is, more than a foot or two behind you. Yeah.
Yep.
Crazy. I know that Kirk had a really an excellent question, and there's been some discussion back and forth. You may have heard some of it in earlier sessions, but my experience has always been, minus integration with Typefi, that it's fairly straightforward to take XML into InDesign, use it as a publishing engine, and
Sure.
get the advantages of the more intense object styles available above and beyond what we can do in Frame. Be able
Sure.
to get the typographic engine that exists in Frame, which is just killer. But what is it? Can you talk a little bit about the ability of somebody like Kirk, who has authors that are writing in a magazine,
Yep.
his author's ability to make changes to content within InDesign and then flow that back into AEM? I think that's a big question he's got.
Okay. I mean, I think, looking at the scriptorium conversation yesterday, that round tripping of content from your source into InDesign as an output target back to your source,
Right.
it can be done. It can be quite painful. I mean, I think DITA is probably one of the least painful in a way from a structure perspective. I mean, a lot of the work that we've done where it's extremely painful to round trip is working with ISO STS or JATS, which is a scholarly publishing XML. And I mean, if you just look at the contrib group, so this is the list of authors, the tags around the author names. You got a separate tag for the first name, the middle name, the last name, the affiliations, the professional titles, and so forth. And all of that, you don't want that in InDesign as a layout. It's too deep or complex of an XML. So it ends up being flattened. And there's also things that are typically missing in the XML that you start to sort of insert, like what is the house style for spacing out if you've got multiple contributors. So you've got a magazine article, you've got two authors for it. Now, in the XML, you're just going to have two names, but in the print version, you might say, author 1 and author 2. That word "and" doesn't exist in your XML.
Aside from the layout, having twice as much information and twice as many photos and byline.
Yeah. So, but the way that Typefi works, I mean, I said earlier that we don't actually use InDesign's XML. We tried very early on to use it and very quickly decided, no, not going to touch that, because it's just a very old version of XML support on the InDesign side of things.
IDML, is that what you're talking about?
No. InDesign actually supports XML tagging within the actual application.
Okay. Got it.
But they've pretty much hidden that infrastructure today and said, don't even go there. But from the Typefi side of things, I can as part of the transform, I can rewrite the XML that's coming through the ICML to include hints or markup tags around content so that when I want to round trip it, I can. Now, our most common round trip workflow that many of our customers actually use is from Microsoft Word. So they start in Word and they flow from Word directly into InDesign through Typefi, and then we can round trip from InDesign back to Word very easily because you've got two style-based tools that are working together. But as soon as you want to go from a structured authoring environment into InDesign, which is not a structured authoring environment, that's what Frame is, then you're going to get into a potential world of hurt trying to make sure that everything validates coming back out of InDesign. Okay.
All right. So, I'm glad you were there for the conversation that I had with Sarah yesterday, because I'm glad to know that my perception that using InDesign as more of an output-only engine versus an ability to edit your XML within your CCMS, that's still mostly true, right? That hasn't totally gone away.
Yeah,
okay.
No, I mean, I think the idea here is to think about InDesign Server, hopefully with the speed of it, that you can get your content from that source so fast that why would you go into InDesign? Why would you Really, why would you pay the extra money to have a seat of InDesign on their desktop when they can just use XML documentation, the web view? They can make their content changes there and just republish it.
Yeah.
That's the preferred way of doing it, is to keep your content as live as long as possible in your source.
Got it. Well, Stefan, other than random movie references in the comments, anything to bring up here?
I haven't looked in the Q&A.
There's a question from Joe Mullerhorn.
Yep.
Is knowledge of the Typefi code necessary to create an InDesign template for use with this program, or is it feasible for a client to prepare the InDesign templates themselves?
Oh yeah. I mean, like what Typefi adds to InDesign is a small structure layer. So you can see in my palettes, like we've got a Typefi sections palette and a Typefi elements palette, where I can start to define some of that structure within InDesign. Because I mean, here's a fun little sort of history on where Typefi came from. And Adobe actually introduced us to someone else that was mildly upset, I guess, at Adobe when they killed Frame for the Mac. And so, moving from the classic Mac OS with Frame, it just wasn't a possibility. And so they brought us in and said, hey, can you help build some Frame features in InDesign? And that's kind of the origin story for where Typefi came from. So we have this concept of a section, which is really just a pattern. So if I look at my first page, it is like, here's an InDesign master page, and here's the pattern of how I want it to appear, left, right, either side, so forth. Do I want to keep repeating that until it runs out of content? And then looking at like elements, like the copyright page or copyright element is actually floating on the page, but I can define where this piece of furniture appears on the page very programmatically. So these are starting to get into that template-driven variable output type stuff that you might look at in building a frame template, but now it's actually available to you in InDesign. So you do need these plugins to build that template, and just a few hours really of understanding. Okay, I've created this prototype. So let's jump into that page. So here I have a series of prototype elements, and like my sidebar element, I've defined this.
Or Caleb, we're not looking at your screen right now.
Oh, you're not? Oh,
yeah, just hold on. Stefan may have given you the hook at some point with your screen share.
All right, let me jump back in there real quick.
There we go. Great.
Okay. Thanks. So on this page, you can see that we've got some prototype elements. This is my sort of library, in-document library of things. And so that sidebar box for that healthcare thing, if I want to, I can see how it responds or reacts, that as I remove content, it shrinks to fit. And as I add content, it grows. So this is a feature with Typefi AutoFit that I can control, and I've named it. You can see in the bottom corner that it's got that little add-on that says sidebar. Yeah. And so this is where you start to add some structure around these things that you create within InDesign. But once you've done that, that's really all that's necessary. Everything else, all the paragraph styles and character styles, this is just normal InDesign workflow and sort of best practices in building your template.
I'm thinking back to my commercial print days when I set up pre-press departments, and I'm laughing at the days worth of time doing like Home Depot layouts and national magazines, where it's just like that's a major. You guys don't understand already. What he's showing you there is just an incredible labor saver.
Yes, yeah, and the thing is, like this particular plugin, Typefi AutoFit, we give it away for free. So if you go to Typefi, you can download this for InDesign, and you can play with it and use it and do some really amazing stuff. One of the things that's not in here, I know, like I'm at the time, but I'll just show you a quick little demo of something you can do with it. So one of the trends that we see in a lot of layouts is that I want to be able to take I want to do like a quote. So I'm gonna fill some content in here, and I want to have the sidebar element travel with the quote as it's linked.
Excellent.
So on the left-hand side, this little double triangle is Typefi AutoFit. It's part of that free tool. So I can link the bottom edge between these two elements, and you can see that we get this little dotted line. And now as I set this to height only, I start deleting content, and you notice how the stroke automatically adjusts itself. So, and that's this free little tool. Go to typefi.com. You can register, download it, and it works with the last 3 versions of InDesign.
I got to tell you that right there with the aerospace market, having to do R bars in aerospace documentation. Oh man, yeah, pretty amazing stuff.
Well, thank you so much for the opportunity to hopefully introduce some new people to InDesign and how you can use InDesign to actually produce tech comms with the quality that you might expect from a Marcom.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
All right.
On, back to you.
Wonderful. Good.